you can see that there is a line that people often cross between trusting and testing, and oftentimes when they cross that line, it ends in tragedy. And that is the very line that the devil is tempting Jesus to cross in our lesson today. In the second temptation in the wilderness, the devil brings Jesus up to a high point in the temple, and he says, "You're the Son of God, right?" And God promises to send his angels to watch over you. Then jump off this building and test to see if that is true. Of course, this is the second temptation. Last week we talked about the first temptation when Jesus had been fasting for 40 days and he was very hungry, and the devil came up to Jesus and he says, "If you are the Son of God, tell these stones to become bread." And Jesus refuted the devil's temptation with Scripture, right? He said, "It is written, man shall not live on bread alone, but on every word that comes from the mouth of God." So now the devil changes up his strategy and he says, "Okay, if you're going to use Scripture, let's test how much you trust the Scriptures." And he does that by taking a Bible passage and he rips it out of context and he twists it and he misapplies it. I think if we're honest with ourselves, sometimes the devil tries that same trick on us. And so it's good for us to take a look at this temptation of Jesus and see how it applies to us and how we can better understand this tension between trusting and testing. So the gospel writer Matthew says it this way: "Then the devil took him to the holy city and had him stand on the highest point of the temple. 'If you are the Son of God,' he said, 'throw yourself down. For it is written, he will command his angels concerning you, and they will lift you up in their hands so that you will not strike your foot against a stone.'" Now, the highest point of the temple would have been on the portico, kind of on the back side of it that overlooked the Kidron Valley. And so if you would have stood at that point and looked down, you would have looked a very long way to the bottom. A jump from there would have easily killed someone unless God would send his angels to catch you. And after all, isn't there a Bible verse about him sending his angels to guard you so that you will not dash your foot against a stone? Go ahead, Jesus, let's test that out. Go ahead and jump. Now, the devil is quoting from Psalm 91, which is, of course, in the first part of the Bible, but he's actually trying to get him to doubt another section of Scripture. He's trying to get him to doubt other things that God says. We're reading this from Matthew chapter 4, and maybe do you know what comes just before Matthew chapter 4? Matthew chapter 3, very good. And at the end of Matthew chapter 3, Jesus is baptized, and when he's baptized, there's a voice from heaven that calls out, "This is my Son, whom I love. With him I am well pleased." And then, by the time we get to here, the devil is trying to get him to doubt those words. "If you are the Son of God." Right? If you are the Son of God. If what God says here is true, then you should be able to do this. It's kind of like the did God really say approach that he took with Adam and Eve, right? Can you really trust what God has to say? How many times aren't you reading the Scriptures and you read a verse here and the devil's already trying to get you to doubt by the time you get to the end of the page? Right? That's kind of what he's doing here. If you are the Son of God, then he is going to protect you. Then you should have no problem jumping off of this building because those angels will no doubt catch you, if those words are true. You know that in your baptism, God has said something very similar about you. He brought you into his family, and he said, "You are my son, you are my daughter." When you were baptized, you were welcomed into God's family, and already throughout your life, the devil is going to try to get you to doubt those words, isn't he? If you are God's son, if God really loves you as a child, then wouldn't he be protecting you or guarding you or making things go better for you? You know, when we look at this temptation, we wonder how it applies to us, and we think, well, maybe, you know, you've never really been tempted to jump off a building just to see if the angels are going to catch you. Maybe you haven't been tempted to handle poisonous rattlesnakes or avoid medical attention and just trusting in the power of prayer. Maybe you haven't been tempted to test God in that way. But doesn't the devil often get you to question, if God really loves me, shouldn't things be going a little better for me? Like health-wise, or with family drama, or with work stress. Don't you think that if I have a connection to the Most High God, that he would help me out a little bit here? And when you ask yourself questions like that, then you are crossing the line from trusting into testing. And that can cause a lot of problems. So we're going to think about this for a moment. What are some problems that arise when you cross that line? For one thing, trusting says, I believe you. Testing says, you have to prove it. Trusting says, I believe you. Testing says, prove it.